Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam.
And I'm Mateship.
And we like World War II media and we want to talk about it.
Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we are continuing our streak of monster movies. We are talking about the movie Beast of War, which came out this year, 2025. It was directed and written by Kiah Roache-Turner, and this film, which is loosely based on a real-life sinking of the Australian ship HMAS Armidale in the Timor Sea on December 1st of 1942, follows a group of fictional soldiers trapped aboard a raft, and they are being hunted by a great white shark, which is an interesting premise. And we are also joined today by our longtime favorite, usually SAS Rogue Heroes correspondent George, but George is here to talk about sharks. Hi, George.
Do you like sharks?
For the benefit of our listeners, George is wearing a sweatshirt that has a shark on it, very appropriately.
Not just any shark. It's the shark Bruce from Jaws, the mechanical
Yes.
shark that they used in that movie, because Jaws is the greatest movie of all time. That's just a fact.
Yes, and we'll get into this later, but Beast of War was inspired by Jaws in many ways. So it's perfect. It's very fitting.
Last week we covered Godzilla Minus One. And I will say, I never thought I would be watching two monster movies in a row for a World War II podcast. But it is a World War II movie, just to be clear. Like, you have to squint a bit, but it is. Just saying. So, what did you guys think of this movie? I'll start with you, Sam.
I really enjoyed it. It's pretty quick. I think it was only like 90 minutes long or something. And I really enjoyed sort of the two main characters, I guess. I thought the relationship was really neat. And I always like, it's sort of horror-y, sort of thriller-y. That's a genre that I really enjoy. I thought they did a really good job of creating this atmosphere. It's really like once the ship has sank and they're on this raft, they are so isolated and they just end up having to fend for themselves. And they did a really good job of making that feel really spooky and very alone and lonely. I really liked that. There's something about shipwrecks that has really captured the popular imagination for like hundreds of years. There's just so many movies and books and TV shows and plays about shipwrecks. And then because I think people have this illusory sense of safety on a ship, but realistically, you're in this totally hostile environment in which you are not designed to survive. And in the absence of the ship, very quickly, the veneer of civilization can disappear. And there are just so many stories historically of like ships going down and the crew resorting to cannibalism and all kinds of stuff like that. And I think that really scares us at our core. It really invokes some primordial fears for us as humans. So, yeah, a really cool movie. It's not just a monster movie. I really do think you get some actual important themes in this movie. I do think that the shark is almost incidental. George, what did you think?
I also really liked it. I think the title and I think the box art doesn't really do it justice. So this film sort of encapsulates about three of my different interests that are probably all related and say something about me psychologically that I'm not sure I want to get into. But it's obviously about World War II. I really enjoy shark movies and sort of creature features. So, but the ones that are sort of plausible rather than, not Ghost Shark or Sharknado and all of those things. They're not really my thing. But there's particularly quite a few Australian movies that are about rogue animals that are fantastic. Blackwater was about a crocodile. Primal was about a crocodile. And they're both really good Australian creature features, which is just about how humans interact with nature. And that's what this film does really well. And I think it goes back to what you were saying about this primordial instinct of like survival. Those stories about what and who we are in these moments of absolute disaster and chaos when we can do absolutely nothing but our best to keep alive. I find those stories fascinating. And that's what this film had in spades. And the fact that it was quite quiet in some ways, it was just a group of guys and this beast in the water. It wasn't about like big action sequences and so on. That was a really, really big selling point for me, that we could just sort of focus in on this one quiet story. But I've also really liked the director, the writers. He did a previous film called Sting, which I really enjoyed. It was about like there's a sci-fi thing about a mutant spider monster, but that was quite tight as well as storytelling. I think it's very, very good at that. So yeah, I loved it.
I will bring some nuance to this conversation, and I was just scared. That's all I want to say about it.
So yeah, me and Sam like horror movies. I think it's an important thing to note for your listeners. We watch this stuff all the time.
Like, for me, it's scary a bit, like the music's loud-ish, loud jump scares, but it's also the ocean again. And if you've listened to our podcast before, you know I have a very big fear of the ocean. So the idea of being on a raft, being like haunted by a shark, not a ghost shark, but just a regular shark, is terrifying. So I had some trouble with this movie. I didn't hate it. As a story, I quite enjoyed it, but I would not choose to watch this, but you guys made me watch it. So this is all your fault, and now I'm traumatized.
It's like, I don't even remember it being that scary, and then I was like, "Oh, yeah, but I also watch horror movies, like, every weekend, so I'm just immune to it at this point."
Yeah, it's pretty gory as well. I didn't mind it. I've gotten used to it by now, just seeing gore, but you know, I always skip horror movies, like I avoid them like the plague. So this was a nice little, I guess I dipped my toes in for this one because I don't think it's like a super horror movie. For me, it was pretty intense. Anyway, let's get into the plot.
It opens with a super brief shot of the main character, Leo, played by Mark Cole Smith, swimming through bloody water. And this represents a flashback that's going to keep recurring for this character and haunts him throughout the film. And we get an opening card that reads, inspired by actual events, which, yeah, I mean, the shipwreck that they're in very much did happen, but all of these characters are fictional.
When I saw like the blood red water, I came into the chat with you both and was like, wait, is this a horror movie?
Yeah, it's a horror movie, but it's a horror movie with themes. One thing that I really enjoy over the past few years is that horror as a genre has really made such a comeback. Obviously, movies like Nope and Get Out kind of started it. And then even like this Halloween season, I saw like Bring Her Back and a few other ones that were really like, yes, they're horror movies, but they also have so much to say about the human condition. And I just eat that shit up. And so I'm really happy to see that there's sort of been like a revitalization of the genre in that way, I guess.
I feel like we should watch Operation Overlord, the horror movie version of it. I think there is one.
Overlord, yeah, I've seen it. It's the one I won't spoil it for you. I won't spoil anything that goes on in that movie. I want you to watch it so badly. It's quite good.
Listen, I will say we do have it on the record now that Mart asked for this.
Yeah.
It wasn't me.
It's Australia, 1942. A group of soldiers are sent on a training exercise. The goal is that they will all return within a set time span, and left behind by the others, a young soldier named Will, played by Joel Nankervis, I hope, is rescued from a mud pit by Leo, who's our main character, if you recall, and in an act that is used to drive home to their comrades that in combat, the only thing that really matters is you and your mates. Like, that's all you got.
Yes. Some very ominous foreshadowing as to as to what's gonna happen later in the movie when it's just them and their mates on a raft.
I'm not quite Australian enough to explore this concept in detail, but the idea of mates and I think the word's mateship is really quite a core Australian cultural thing. It goes beyond this idea of like friendship and bonding. It's sort of like these are the people that you are loyal to, these are the people that you stand with shoulder to shoulder, all of that. And I think it comes back again later in the movie where somebody says, "Would you do that to your mate?" And it is a slightly bigger word, I think, than perhaps we use it, certainly in the UK, to just mean friend.
Their commander has lost an arm, and I feel that's also pretty much foreshadowing something that happens later.
Definitely. And, I would just like to point out that last week they defeated Godzilla with the power of friendship, so maybe the power of friendship will be enough to help them defeat this shark.
Who knows? I will say I really like Will. I was like, I need to protect this boy with my life on this raft, even if I hate the water. Will has to live.
Yeah, which is, I think, really well written and well acted because that's obviously how Leo, the main character, feels as well. So, Yeah, definitely. Throughout training, Leo has nightmares, and it starts to become clearer as to what they are. And it's his brother Archie, played by Aswan Reed, who seemingly died in some kind of incident while fishing and potentially a shark related incident. We are also introduced to other characters, including the main antagonist, this guy who's a massive dickhead named Des, played by Sam Delish. There's a guy named Stan, played by Maximilian Johnson. There's another super young guy named Teddy. He's played by Lee Tiger Holly. There's a guy named Thompson, played by Sam Parsonson. And there's a guy named Bobby, played by Tristan McKinnon. And all of these guys will end up on the raft with them later. So that's why they're relevant.
Just a band of miscreants. No, they're not all miscreants, but I thought it was an interesting collection of different characters.
Des, in particular, is pretty racist towards our main character, Leo, who is Indigenous. There were 3,000 First Nations Australians who served in World War II. At the time, they faced heavy discrimination, both socially and by a government that restricted their rights. It was pretty uneven. Depending on where you lived in Australia, you might be treated better or worse. They often faced racial segregation, not dissimilar to what happened to Black people in the US. Early on in the war, there was this inconsistently enforced color bar, quote unquote, that prevented many from joining up until essentially the Japanese attacked mainland Australia, and the threat of invasion meant that there was an urgent need for more fighting men. So they were like, I guess we can't really afford to be racist if we need more guys. So there's a little comment that Leo makes in the movie about receiving significantly less pay than his white compatriots, and that is true. After the war, some veterans became activists for Indigenous rights, which did not begin to significantly improve until the 1960s. They often did not have access to veterans' benefits offered to their white peers, and their service did not win them their citizenship. It was another 20 years before they were even allowed to vote in Australia, and this was a similar situation to what we had here in Canada as well, for our Canadian listeners.
Obviously, because Des is such a dickhead, Leo gets into a fight with him. And again, there's some foreshadowing because Leo disappears underneath the surface of the water. They're in some sort of river. And he's a pretty good swimmer. We've seen this in the flashbacks as well. And this fight just made me laugh so much. The movie's funny in some ways too. I found it really enjoyable. But anyway, after the fight, he gets into the infirmary because he gets decked pretty hard. And Leo meets nurses Hazel, played by Lauren Grimston, and Susie, who's pretty reluctant to tell him her name, played by Laura Brogan Brown. And he and Will have a little after hours party in our last hurrah before setting off. And Will is so shy, and it's so cute.
Wasn't there that incredibly funny moment right after the fight where he's like, Leo stands up and like, "Can I go to the medical tent now?" And then all of the rest of the guys are like, "Wait, no, I also want to go to the medical tent because that's where the hot nurses are."
Yeah, their scene was very blink and you'll miss it, but I did want to include them because we always complain about there not being enough women in these movies, and they did indeed have some women in this movie. So they are on their transport ship, and somewhere in the Timor Sea, which is between Timor-Leste, which at that time was part of Portugal, and the northwest coast of Australia, their transport ship is sunk during a Japanese attack. We don't really know what happens, but it's very loud and panicky and chaotic, and Leo has to rescue Will again in the water. The two of them build a raft and rescue a head wounded Thompson from the water as well. And they start to see the first signs that there is something lurking beneath the waves.
And I said, oh no, he coming.
Oh no, he coming. Yeah, so just for context, in February of 1942, the Japanese invaded Timor in the South Pacific. The Dutch and Australian soldiers who opposed them were swiftly defeated, and those who evaded capture engaged in a guerrilla war with the Japanese for almost a year. The HMAS Armidale, that's the ship that this movie is based on, or the sinking is based on. It was one of 3 Australian ships sent to resupply and evacuate troops and civilians from Betano Bay in Timor at the end of November 1942. 2 of the ships came under attack, and the Armidale was sunk by torpedo bombers. The survivors built a raft, and they found a small motorboat and a badly damaged whaler that had survived the sinking. When rescue was slow to arrive, so this is after they'd been on the water 3 or 4 days, and yes, they did battle some sharks, the captain and 21 other men set out on the motorboat to find help. 2 days after that, when they hadn't come back, another 29 survivors did the same in the patched up whaler. Those on the motorboat and the whaler were spotted by recon aircraft and were rescued by a ship. The plane spotted the raft as well on December 8th with about 20 survivors remaining aboard, and the pilot took a photograph that is truly haunting. I recommend that you look it up because it will give you the shivers. Just these 20 guys in this photo that were never seen again. The plane flew back to get help and was not able to find the raft again, and the men were never recovered. And of the 149 men aboard the Armidale, there were only 49 total survivors of the sinking.
I will put the photo on the website, by the way, because you do have to see it, and it will give you chills.
I think something that is not really thought about enough is how difficult it is to find people on the sea. And so even that we got this shot of them, and that I don't think it's that surprising, but the hope that it must have given these men to have seen a plane, and then we don't know what happened after that. It could be that they just weren't found for another while. It is awful to think about.
Yeah.
I was gonna mention our fourth episode, which also features a raft. What's the movie called with our friend O'Donnell in it? Help.
Is it Unbroken?
Unbroken, yeah, that's it.
If you want to listen to some more episodes about people getting lost at sea, do listen to our episode about Unbroken.
If you want to listen to more hideous raft based misadventures.
One thing I did find out when I was looking up about the Armadale is that there was one of the seamen, Edward Sheehan. He, I think, has posthumously been awarded the Victoria Cross for Australia for his actions on the day. He'd gone into one of the guns and apparently shot down a couple of the planes that were attacking. But I thought it was interesting because his nickname was Teddy. So I do wonder if that's the reason why we've got a Teddy name in the film as well.
Nice. Yeah, definitely could be. Yeah, I recall reading about him too. He was basically firing at the planes even as he sank under the water. Yeah, hero shit for sure.
Incredible.
Another raft turns up with more survivors because we haven't got enough men yet. One of them is Bobby. He's been shot in the gut. The other one is Stan, who's been shot in the face. It's a whole fun bunch of people who've been shot and are injured. There's Teddy, and then there's Des, our asshole guy. I really liked him as a character, by the way. I think the assholes are always the most interesting of the bunch.
Yeah, and you know he's gonna survive to the end because he has to redeem himself.
Right.
I was just like, he's quite a realistic villain in quotes. Like, I like that he's not cartoonishly evil. He's just a racist dickhead. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. He reminds me a little bit of Harry Styles' character in Dunkirk because he's also a similar kind of dickhead where they're just kind of looking out for themselves and trying to survive, but doing it in a way that makes him seem like a dickhead. And yeah, I enjoyed him. So they all get onto the makeshift raft together, and then as the day breaks, they discover that they are very hopelessly lost with little hope of rescue because they're in the middle of fucking nowhere. And it's not long before they notice the shark because he eats poor Bobby off of the side of the raft. It's pretty, like, shocking.
He just yoinks him right off.
And Bobby doesn't die right away. He bobs around on the sea for a while trying to swim. And
I
Stan,
love that you just hilarious to me that you said he bobs around in the sea. I'm like, yeah, I bet he did after he got all his limbs chewed off by a shark.
yeah.
Is that why they call him Bobby?
But anyway, he's been holding an air raid siren to try and attract attention, to try and get rescued. But obviously, because this is a horror movie, it has to get stuck to the shark, so he becomes more scary anytime he's near them because they hear the air siren.
Yeah, it's this super, super eerie sound that they just hear coming out of the fog, like some unidentifiable beast. Like it's pretty spooky.
Yeah. And I don't know how this works, like physically, how this would work. Why is it making noise? But I don't care because it adds to the atmosphere.
It's true. And I guess unlike Godzilla, a shark isn't out here like making scary sharky noises. So you kind of have to like add your own.
Right.
I mean, I think it does roar at one point. I know in Jaws they have the shark roaring, but it reminded me of there's a scene in Dairy Girls where the grandpa is trying to figure out a movie, and he's like, it's got the musical shark in it, and he's thinking of the movie Jaws because of the John Williams score. I was like, well, this is a literal musical shark in a way.
And you know, an air siren is pretty terrifying by itself, but when it's broken and sort of wailing, it becomes this fringe thing where, like, God, there be monsters out there.
Yeah, for sure.
It is beautiful. I think beautifully atmospheric. This film, like, because it's got that orange haze, and then you've got this siren. Like, for all the jokes, it is fantastically scary.
Yeah. And they do like a shark is just a shark gonna do what a shark gonna do? But they, by affixing this creepy air raid siren to it, you really get this sense. I'm sure if you were on the raft, you would feel like the shark was doing it on purpose, that the
Mhm.
shark is like evil in some way, even though, a shark is just an animal. So I really feel like the air raid siren helps to kind of build it up the way it would have been built up for these men on the raft. You get this sense of like it's actively hunting them. It like deliberately means them harm. Stan, our other wounded guy, soon gets yanked into the water as well. These guys are bleeding all over the place. So, yeah, that's shark bait right there. They're able to rescue him, but he's pretty fucked up and he's going to die soon if they're not able to get help. So, Leo has spotted this motorboat that's sitting not that far from them, and he makes this trek across all of this floating debris to get to it. And, the shark is circling the whole time, and they're worried that he's going to get eaten. But he does manage to get this motorboat and bring it back, and then the engine won't turn over. So they're fucked.
So he does make a deck with the motorboat to the raft, and they get on it, and then they fall asleep. Daz is holding one of their two remaining grenades in his sleeve, and kind of in his sleep fries out the pin and nearly kills all of them. And then poor Stan, who's already like bleeding and dying and sad, rolls over onto the grenade like a true hero and saves all of them. And his guts are everywhere.
It also has one of my favorite lines, and I can't remember exactly how it goes, but it's like, "You bloody blew up Stan." Incredible. That incredible amount of tension immediately undercut. I think this is why I love Australian horror movies, because it always has that really, like, human, straightforward stuff in it.
Yeah, and tensions are pretty high. Everyone is understandably pretty pissed at Des for causing this to happen, and he says, obviously it's not his fault. He didn't do it on purpose. You can tell that at some point him and Leo are gonna have it out.
Again.
Yeah. They are super, super low on food and water, and they're gonna eat one of their last cans of food, and they discover that Thompson, poor sweet Thompson, who has a head wound and has not been thinking straight, he has eaten the rest of the peaches, and he just keeps saying that, there's a "We'll just go back to the ship and get more," and they're like, "Thompson, there is no ship." And I thought this was interesting because there's this famous case of, in the late 19th century, a British yacht, I think, sunk off the coast of Africa, and the remaining crew ate the cabin boy. And part of that story was that as the cabin boy is just this young man, right? And before they killed him, he kept drinking seawater and he wasn't feeling well and he became delirious. So he just kept saying, "Oh, there's a ship coming. We'll be rescued. Don't worry. We'll just go back to the ship. No problem." And I do feel like perhaps that was an inspiration for this little scene in the movie. But yeah, so they're pretty upset at this point because all their peaches are gone. Des tells them a story about his dad having PTSD from having fought at Gallipoli in World War One, which at least partially explains why he's like this. And then we get definitely the funniest scene in the movie. The boys have a go at drinking their own piss.
And then notably, after they've just drank their own piss, it starts raining.
Listen,
I really laughed at that. It was so funny to me. Yeah, the Gallipoli campaign in World War One. We talked about this briefly in our Winston Churchill Darkest Hour episode because Winston Churchill was a sponsor of the expedition, and then when it was disastrous, it really damaged his reputation at the time. But essentially, the Australian and New Zealand forces landed on the Turkish peninsula of Gallipoli in April of 1915. The goal was to weaken the Ottoman Empire, which was allied with Germany, and to open a supply line to Russia. The Allies had to give up after 8 months of fighting and a total of 500,000 casualties on both sides. And it really became a part of sort of the national identity building that Australia and New Zealand went through. We have a similar thing in Canada where the Canadians took Vimy Ridge in France during World War One, and that I think was used by the government and exists in a lot of people's minds as like that's the moment when we became a country. And this is kind of a similar thing for Gallipoli with Australia and New Zealand. The anniversary of the landings is called Anzac Day, and it's a greater military commemoration in Australia and New Zealand than Remembrance Day itself. So Des talking about how his dad was at Gallipoli, you can kind of understand why someone might have PTSD from a battle like that and take it out on his family.
In case you were wondering who was going to be the next victim, it's Thompson. He gets eaten during the night. Leo was asleep having a dream at this point, and he just wakes to find Thompson being eaten. It's very traumatic. And you can tell that he's starting to lose his marbles a little bit. And that's when he tries to fling himself into the ocean because he thinks his little brother is there calling to him.
And I guess we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about the Indianapolis. But this, I think, is again, as you were saying with the account of the cabin boy, quite a common scary thing in this kind of situation, which is just the hallucinations and losing your own sense of self and understanding is just as much a danger to yourself and everybody else as the actual outside. So it becomes even more terrifying. And it also brings up some really heartbreaking dilemmas that your surviving fellows have to make about you and how they will continue to help or not. Because at some point you do have to cross this line into being a danger.
Yeah, for sure. There's false hope of rescue. They see a plane going overhead. As we mentioned, it's pretty foggy and misty, so they haven't really been able to see very far away. This is the first sign they've had of civilization. But it turns out that the plane is a Japanese Zero. It's a fighter plane, which strafes them and forces them into the water with the shark. Teddy is hit by one of the bullets from the plane, and Des sacrifices Teddy to the shark to save himself. Leo was shot as well, but not so badly that he can't damage the Zero with the remaining gun, and it plummets into the sea, which will be relevant in a moment.
And the fight we mentioned earlier between Leo and Des kind of ensues at this point because obviously Leo's like mad and everybody else is mad that Des has sacrificed their friend, even though he was gonna die anyway. That's his reasoning. But in that fight, Des goes into the water and he gets bit by the shark. The shark has some more chompy chompies. And so two of the three on the raft are now wounded and they have no food and no water, so they are not having a very good time.
No. And man, you just gotta imagine that shark in the water who's just like, this is great. They keep dropping snacks in here. Best day of my life.
I'm sorry, I couldn't unmute because I was having a minor breakdown at this very happy shark.
Yeah. I mean, if you really think about it, whether or not this is a horror movie is all a matter of perspective. It could be a show on the Food Network.
It's just changing the soundtrack, I guess.
Yeah. So we'd seen this Zero plane go into the water, and the pilot, Tetsuo Harada, played by Masa Yamaguchi, who was also, I believe, in The Narrow Road to the Deep North, and you can go listen to our episode about that if you would like. He turns up on a raft, having survived the plane going into the water. He pretends to surrender. This is one of those classic, I guess, tropes about the Japanese in World War II. One of those well-known things is that there were a lot of instances where they said they were going to surrender and did not do that. And we talked about this in our Pacific episodes somewhat. And so he pretends to surrender. The other two, Des and Leo, are like, Will, as the only non-wounded person, you got to kill him. And Will is like, I can't, because he's just a baby. And this turns out to be an error. The pilot attacks them. Leo goes into the water during the ensuing fight, but Des has his big redemption moment and saves them.
I love how he uses like the force of smacking a, I don't know what it is. It's probably like a bomb from the Zero, I'm guessing. That he smacks on the side of the raft and it just explodes. I love it. And
Yeah.
also the raft that the pilot is on is I think the wing of his Zero, which I thought was really neat. It's just like a piece of fighter plane that he's standing on.
Such a cool sequence, his arrival, though. It's because it's quite long, really. And this is such a short movie with so much happening. And it's quite a long, still sequence of them slowly just sort of appearing and getting closer and closer. And it's so quiet. It's perfect. It's a proper horror moment.
It's almost an art house shot too. It's like you see like his silhouette against the sun and it's kind of beautiful and it looks kind of peaceful. Which I suppose is the hope that they have when they see him coming. At first they think it's someone coming to rescue them again, but it's the pilot, so guess not.
First the shark and now this pilot are both adversaries who really are attacking them for their own survival. I guess that's what war is pretty much. But yeah, it's this like, I don't know, sense of like him or us kind of thing, and that's very similar to how it's been with the shark.
So that's another one gone in the form of Daz. So they're down to two now on the raft. It's just Will and Leo again, our favorite characters. And Will discovers his toolbox on the Zero, I think, that could potentially help them fix the motorboat. So finally, there's some actual hope. But meanwhile, the shark is still out there, and Leo decides to risk it all and jumps into the water with his last grenade and kind of shoves it into its mouth, losing an arm, foreshadowing first from their commander who had no arm. And so he gets back to the raft, minus an arm, and he survives. And the two of them patter off towards the horizon to, to the strains of Amazing Grace. And there is one final shot of the shark. I'm pretty sure it exploded, but we see it anyway, so.
Listen, nothing stays dead in like a monster movie.
Yeah, exactly. There's always gonna
And
be we had the same thing at the end of Godzilla last week. It's like, "Ah, you see it starting to come back." But I kinda like that they didn't give in to, sort of this horror movie thing that happens sometimes where it's like everyone has to die in order for this to be
Yeah.
sufficiently horror-y, and they didn't cave to that. They allowed these 2 survivors to survive and sail off into the sunset. And, you know, if it is based on history, probably what happens after the movie ends is that they never make it to safety, but we're allowed to have that hope, which I kind of enjoyed.
Mhm. And not to spoil an over 50-year-old movie, a 50-year-old movie, but the ending of Jaws is quite similar, where you've got Brody and Hooper on a bit of wreckage swimming off into, like, towards safety, and I do wonder if there's, like, an homage there of it, which, by the way, they eventually reach during the credit scene, which I didn't know for years because I had it on a recorded VHS, but I saw it in the cinema, and I finally saw that final moment.
You're like, "This changes everything."
I'm like, "Oh, they do survive."
I want to make references to the Titanic from the very beginning of the movie because I was like, they're getting on a door. Will it hold both of them?
And you know what, too? The thing with them not able to fix the motorboat until the end, like, I really don't think that they could have fit the original 7 or 8 dudes onto the motorboat. Like, it kinda had to be that there was only 2 of them left in order for them to use it.
It was meant to be.
Yeah.
I just realized that they killed the shark in the exact same way that they killed Godzilla.
Yeah, it's true. They, I just really liked when Leo has their last grenade, which this last grenade has sort of continued to resurface through the movie because obviously Des dropped their second last grenade and which resulted in Stan's death. And, you know, they're like, "Okay, we have 1 grenade left." And then when they're having the fight with the Japanese pilot, you keep panning over to this grenade that none of them are able to reach. And then they end up, you know, Des ends up being able to dispatch this Japanese pilot without using that last grenade. So it keeps popping up again and again and again that they have this one final grenade. And when Leo just jumps into the water and just feeds it to the shark, it just jams his whole arm into his mouth. I was like, "Oh fuck yeah." I just loved it. It was such a great shot.
That was very cool. You know what other shark was exploded?
Culturally, we just love an exploding shark.
We just love an exploding shark.
And I did like too how obviously Leo's flashbacks throughout the movie of his brother that he wasn't able to save in this other shark related incident. And he's in this moment where there's this kid that he's been able to rescue a couple of times. And the kid is, you know, obviously about to return the favor. When he jumps into the water, it's like, yeah, I mean, he probably does not expect to survive that encounter with the shark, but he gets to survive the encounter and he gets to, you know, he's not forced to sacrifice himself to make up for what happened with his brother. And yeah, I don't know, I liked it.
I like that. It's yeah,
I thought
it
I
ended on
thought
that note of hope.
I thought for a while that the shark in this movie was the same shark that killed his brother. And Leo thinks that at some point as well, because he says, the shark is coming for me. But he's kind of, I guess, like parched and has had no food and is losing his mind a bit. So,
Well, the shark always has to be a metaphor.
right. I will have a shark PTSD for the rest of my life.
Well, the nice
No.
thing about sharks is that, much like piranhas, you don't really have to worry about it if you don't go directly into their house, aka the ocean.
Yeah. And they're just big puppies doing what they do.
It's
A lot
true.
of sharks don't even mean to kill people. They are chomping to figure out what you are, but they're just like massive pointy machines,
Yeah,
unfortunately. So that's just gonna get you.
they'll just take a little nibble, and then they'll be like, "Bleh."
Justice. Justice for sharks. I genuinely I love sharks so much. I love shark horror movies, but I think sharks are absolutely beautiful, beautiful creatures.
You can have them. I don't want them.
I love
It's
it. All sharks now belong to me.
yeah.
Fantastic.
The film is dedicated to Jim Roach. It shows it in the credits. It has his name, and then it says 1913 to 1945. He was the director's grandfather. Roach was killed by friendly fire coming back from a night mission towards the end of World War II. And the director, in an interview that I read, said that he included many aspects of his grandfather into Leo, the main character, which you can definitely tell because Leo's very, in many ways, kind of like the archetype of a hero. And we've talked about this a little bit before. We talked about it with Bruce a couple of weeks ago, about how a lot of movies that are made by people who had, fathers and grandfathers who fought in World War II tend to have this almost like nostalgia lens over it, where it's like, here are these heroes who can do no wrong type of thing. So I think you can really tell. I don't think Leo is like a two-dimensional character by any means, but you can definitely tell that the director sense of fondness towards him and wanted to make him the most that he could be. The director was inspired by the USS Indianapolis speech from Jaws, wherein the character Quint recounts the shark attacks he endured when his ship went down during World War II. So some listeners might be familiar with the story of the USS Indianapolis. It was an American cruiser that was returning to the Philippines after delivering uranium and other components for the atomic bomb to a U.S. naval base in the Pacific in July of 1945. And it was struck by torpedoes from a Japanese submarine and sank in 12 minutes. Of the 1,200 men aboard, about 900 survived the initial sinking, but only 316 remained by the time they were rescued. And the sinking is notorious for, among other things, how long it took for the Navy to even notice it was missing. It was like 3.5 days, and the hundreds of sharks that gathered to eat the dead and pick off survivors.
That's terrifying. I have not seen Jaws, so I didn't know the story either. But, oh god, just imagine being out there at sea, waiting for someone to find you. I mean, it's the same for this movie. I just can't even think about it without just being terrified.
Yeah, I think with the USS Indianapolis too, even though a lot of men survived the initial sinking, initially there was like a 2-mile long spread of various, you'd have some guys on a lifeboat, you'd have some guys clinging to wreckage, like these little groups. And as time went by, it became like a larger and larger and larger spread till soon they were spread across like 30 miles. And they kept drifting away from the site of the sinking. So by the time the Navy figured out that the ship never came back and they should probably go and look for some guys, the situation had kind of unraveled to the point where, there was some cannibalism, there was some sexual assault, there was just really, it did not take very long for the veneer civilization to be stripped completely off for these guys that had very slim chance of being rescued.
Yeah, that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that I think a lot of these guys suffered from having drunk salt water and so on, and just sort of losing their senses. So, if I recall correctly, there were quite a lot of incidents where these groups of men had to make plans as to what would happen if one of their fellows became a danger to their groups, and they would have to make the decision to actually kill them because otherwise they would all die. And so that added toll of having to make these calls, it must have affected, and it did, I think, affect all of the people who survived for decades and years for the rest of their lives. And I think one of the really heartbreaking stories out of the Indianapolis is that I feel like the captain, what's his name? Charles McVeigh, was scapegoated quite badly for this. He was court-martialed for not doing what he was supposed to. So he didn't move the ship in the way that he was supposed to avoid the torpedoes. He didn't send out distress calls or whatever. And actually, he did send out distress calls, but they were not picked up and they were not transmitted properly by the people who received them. And I think even the Japanese commander, during sort of like the investigations and the trials, said there is nothing that he could have done about the movement of his ship to prevent me from having gotten him because we were in such a great position. And yet it wouldn't be until I think after his death that he was sort of exonerated of all of this blame. And he actually, I think he committed suicide at the end. I think largely the resulting pressures of this cost him his life decades later when he committed suicide. And it's absolutely devastating.
Yeah, it was so horrific, and I think because it happened right at the end of the war, to a lot of people it seemed, senseless in some ways, and people just wanted someone to blame, and I definitely remember reading about that as well. I think it's interesting that, talking about, like, the cannibalism and the sexual assault and and, having to make the call of whether or not your crewmate is too dangerous to be allowed to live, or if he's putting the rest of the group at jeopardy. They steered away from really touching on that in this movie. As much as it is gory and, you are seeing guys getting eaten by sharks, they stayed away from touching on the real darkness, I guess, the human darkness.
I mean, and that's, I think, an instinct that we all do when talking about. For years, I only knew about the Indianapolis as the shark attack, and if you look at a lot of like news articles and things, it just refers like the deadliest shark attack. It does not go into all of the other horrors, and I think it's because it's so difficult to comprehend, and that I think also would have been a very different movie.
Yeah, for sure. Fun fact, there were no water tanks big enough for filming, so they had to build their own. So that the tank that you see them in the movie, that most of the movie takes place in, it was 40 meters across and filled with nearly 2 million liters of water, which is pretty cool. And they obviously developed an animatronic shark for use in the movie, and they nicknamed it Shaza because, of course, they did.
Not mentioned, the shark is design is gnarly as hell. It's so cool. It's a great looking shark. I love
Yeah,
it.
they did a good job, considering this movie is, comparatively low budge. With the sinking of the USS Indianapolis, I really think that went a long way to projecting this image of sharks as these like people hunting monsters into the public consciousness. But really, I mean, this ship went under the water and there were so many dead bodies. And in a lot of instances, guys didn't want to let their friend's body go because they wanted to hold on to it so that when they got rescued, they could bring the body home to the friend's family or whatever, which is a nice thought. But if you have a dead friend who's bleeding everywhere, it's going to bring in sharks. And once they eat all the dead bodies, they are going to start being like, what's this over here? It's, a guy who's been in the water for 3 days, which also causes like your skin to slough off and stuff. You're
Mhm.
super dehydrated, so you're not moving around very much. It's like, yeah, of course the sharks are gonna start to nibble on living people. It's not that sharks innately would just love to eat a person as a snack.
No, I mean, they are primed to go after wounded prey, like a fish in distress, something bleeding out. That's what they do. Not to be, negate the horror and say it's okay, sharks are all great, but they are just animals. So again, like all the horror movies are fantastic, but even Peter Benchley was like very into shark conservation later in his life because of what Jaws, Peter Benchley, who wrote the original Jaws novel, because of what Jaws did to the public consciousness around sharks as evil killing machines. So, you know, there's that to think about too, please.
Sharks are fine. Just let them take a little nibble.
A little nibble, that's all they want.
You don't need all those limbs. Come on now.
Yes, I do. Before we start rating this movie, I would like to remind you that you can follow us wherever you get your podcast, and you should rate us 5 stars and leave a review because I would love you. And if you send this to a friend, what happens, Sam, if people send this to a friend?
Every time you send this episode to a friend, a shark chews the arm off a racist.
Perfect. That's good. Anyway, go and do that, please. Thank you.
All right, Mart, how many chompy chomps out of 10 would you rate this movie?
God, I would rate this movie 6 out of 10 chompy chomps because I didn't hate it as much as I thought I was gonna for it being a horror movie. I liked the characters and I was rooting for them to survive, which is good enough for me. So that's why it gets a 6. The reason it only gets a 6 is because it's a horror movie and I don't like them. Next.
Do you want to go, George?
I think I would rate it 7 or 8 chop choppers out of 10. I did really enjoy it. It's very quiet movie. I thought it was really beautifully sort of like shot. It looked visually so beautiful all of the time. And I really enjoy that in the movie. So yeah, 8 is a good one.
Yeah, you know what? I'll also give it 8 choppy chomps out of 10. Really enjoyed the whole watching experience. There were some really funny scenes unexpectedly that I quite enjoyed. In as much as these characters, some of them aren't on screen for very long before they get eaten, I was able to, kind of tell them apart. They did feel fleshed out to me for the most part. I think I would have been curious to see what the movie would have been like if they had leaned into that, human darkness a little bit more. But that said, I did like the movie the way it was made. I would definitely watch it again, and I would also recommend it to other people. I got a real kick out of it?
I have one last question before we end this. Did we think this was a World War II movie? Or did this just happen to be set during World War II?
Well, I think it needed to be set during some kind of conflict because they put so much work into setting up this whole thing where it's like initially these guys are kind of all out for themselves and they have to learn how to work together and take care of each other. I think very famously in a lot of war media, like Band of Brothers, for example, this like bond forged by combat is just this subject matter that seems really fascinating to a lot of people. And and because they had set all that up, that way when they are on the raft and they're having to make these individual decisions, you can kind of see that feeding into it. So yeah, I do definitely think it's a World War II movie. I can see what you're saying. There are some parts where they're on the raft where it's like, yeah, they could be on a raft anywhere, anytime. But I do think sort of the broad themes of the movie require it to be set during at least some kind of conflict.
Thank you. Is anyone reading anything they want to talk about?
I am. I'm reading One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This by Omar El Akkad. And he calls it his breakup letter with the West. He was born in Egypt. He lived in Canada for a little while. He lives in the US now, I think. And he's a novelist and a journalist. And he just talks about how seeing what's happening in Gaza to the Palestinians and seeing, so many attempts by Western liberals to justify it or to condemn it, but then at the same time still be supporting Israel through arms sales and that kind of stuff. How it's really kind of disillusioned him about this idea of the Western world believing in the ideas of freedom, protecting the vulnerable, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's kind of a memoir, but yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. He's got a lot of very pointed things to say.
George, books.
Book, yeah, of course I'm reading something. Possibly slightly less highbrow at the moment. It's a fiction book that I'm reading on audiobook called It's Not a Cult. It's by Joey Batey, who plays Jaskier in The Witcher. And it's basically just this sort of folk horror novel about this band who they're not very famous. And then a violent incident occurs at a gig and it gets picked up and sort of shared through influencers and media. And then they sort of end up becoming uh, essentially the leaders of this sort of cult-like experience. And I haven't finished it yet, so I don't know how it ends. I don't think well for any member of the band. But it's a really interesting look at the nature of fame and sort of ownership that fans and fandom have towards the objects of that fandom. And I think it probably is very informed by Joey Baker's own experiences, even though it is not technically biographical in any way. It's, he's got a band with these a few members and sudden fame. What happened? But it's a really interesting book, and I do highly recommend it.
You always read interesting shit, George.
Cool. I am not reading anything. I did get an interesting book though the other day. In my local paper, I read a announcement that there was a new self-published book by someone who lives in the next town over from me. And I want to say his grandpa, probably his grandpa, was sent to Germany to work for the German war machine. And the book is called No Mail. And I haven't read it yet, but it's his diary from the war camp he was in. And I'm really interested to see it because it happened to someone who lived in the next town over. So that's interesting to me.
It
So
is
It sounds
interesting.
like
You'll have to let me know if it's good.
I also wonder if it's gonna help me look into my own grandfather's story more and write that story, which is what I've been wanting to do but have been putting off. So hopefully it'll inspire me to get
Hell
going.
yeah.
Anyway, George, thank you for joining us again.
thanks for having me and for letting me talk about sharks.
I wish you guys could see George's face right now. Just like lit up.
I'm so happy.
George has got many interesting hobbies. One of them is sharks.
Genuinely, if I put this into the group chat with my best friends that I would be talking about this, they're like, of course, there's nothing more you.
So, thank you everyone else for listening to another episode of Rosie. You can follow us wherever you get your podcast and rate us 5 stars, as we've said. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast, or you can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com. And George is just showing us our sticker. Thanks, George. If you want a sticker, if you want me to sell those, hit me up and I will sell those to you. Alright, see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.